Most nights when the curtain fell and the audience went home, Dean Martin drove back to his house in Beverly Hills, poured himself a drink, and sat alone in front of the television until sleep finally took him. There was no entourage waiting, no after-party calling his name, just silence and a man who had learned to live inside it. Yet the moment he stepped into the light, something electric happened. His charisma was not performed. It was simply present, like heat from a fire you couldn't explain. His performances in films like Rio Bravo alongside John Wayne and The Young Lions with Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift shattered every assumption critics had made about him. He brought depth to roles no one believed he could carry. He showed vulnerability in scenes that required stillness and a quiet range that left directors stunned. Hollywood had spent years trying to define him. The comic sidekick, the crooning lounge act, the pretty face standing next to Jerry Lewis. But Dean refused every label they pinned to him. He broke the box open and walked out on his own terms. Then came the Dean Martin Show in 1965, and with it, one of the most audacious negotiations in television history. NBC wanted Dean's charm bottled and delivered weekly into American living rooms. Dean agreed, but only under conditions that made network executives sweat. No rehearsals, one filming day per week, and full creative and financial ownership of the show after its initial broadcast. These were demands no performer had dared make at that scale. NBC, convinced they had no choice, agreed to every one of them. What followed was nothing short of a phenomenon. Over the course of 9 seasons, Dean delivered 264 episodes that averaged more than 40 million viewers each week, making it one of the most watched programs on American television throughout the late 1960s. The show featured celebrity guests ranging from Bob Hope to Orson Welles, comedy sketches, musical performances, and Dean's signature style of wandering through it all, as if he had just wandered in from the golf course. Every week he appeared completely unprepared, slightly amused, and absolutely in command. That was the secret everyone took years to understand. The looseness was not laziness. It was mastery. He was so deeply himself, so thoroughly comfortable in his own skin, that no amount of polish could have improved what he gave naturally. Unscripted, unbothered, and untouchable. But the brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadow it cast. The more famous Dean became, the more hollow the evenings felt when the cameras went off. He had been married twice, first to Elizabeth and McDonald, with whom he had 4 children, and then to Jean Beager, who gave him 3 more. His marriage to Jean ended in 1973 after years of distance and the quiet erosion that fame tends to bring to private life. He later married Kathy Hahn in 1973, but that union lasted only a few years. Behind the laughter and the easy grin was a man who struggled to let people close. The applause was real. The friendships with Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop were genuine. But they lived in a world built on performance, and when the performance ended, Dean often found himself without a script for what came next. He once said with the kind of honesty disguised as humor that only he could pull off, "If you have luck, you don't have to be smart, but luck fades." By the close of the 1970s, the luck and the laughter both began to thin, and the dimming of Dean Martin's heart had quietly begun. Then came the day that broke him completely. On March 21st, 1987, Dean Paul Martin, his son from his marriage to Jean, died when his F-4C Phantom jet crashed into the snow-covered San Bernardino Mountains during a severe winter storm. He was 35 years old. Dean Paul had followed his father's footsteps into entertainment, acting in films and recording music, but he had also pursued a proud career as a pilot in the California Air National Guard. He was talented, handsome, and full of life, everything his father had hoped he would be. Dean Martin called him the Golden Boy, and that description carried the full weight of a father's pride. The two shared a bond that transcended the usual complications of Hollywood families. Dean Paul was the piece of himself that Dean Sr. believed was untouchable by the cruelty of the world. He was wrong. The search for the wreckage stretched across 6 agonizing days in the mountains before rescuers finally recovered what remained. When the search ended, something in Dean Martin ended with it. Those who had known him for decades said they watched the light leave his eyes and never return. He stopped performing with any real presence. He stopped laughing the way he once had. He stopped caring about the things that had once driven him. His friend and impressionist Rich Little, who had worked alongside him for years, said it plainly. Once Dean lost his son, that was the end of him. The grief did not break him loudly. It simply hollowed him out from the inside, quietly and completely. At the time of the crash, Dean had been preparing for what was being called one of the greatest entertainment events of the decade. Together with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., he was set to embark on the Together Again tour, later known as the Ultimate Event, a triumphant reunion of the most legendary performers of their generation. Tickets sold out almost instantly. Anticipation was enormous. But after Dean Paul's death, Dean could not summon what the stage required. He appeared for the first handful of performances, standing in the spotlight, looking like a man who had forgotten why he was there, distant and unreachable in a way that no amount of applause could penetrate. Then he withdrew entirely, walking away from the tour mid-run. Sinatra, who loved Dean like a brother and worried about him constantly, urged him to continue, believing that performance might be the thing to pull him back from the edge. Dean refused. He had nothing left to give to a crowd. His ex-wife Jean, despite the years and the divorce and everything that had passed between them, came immediately to his side. She was perhaps the only person on earth who understood the particular shape of his grief, because she carried the same loss. Though they had been separated for over a decade, she positioned herself near him with quiet determination. She began eating in the same Beverly Hills restaurant where Dean took his meals alone each evening, not sitting with him or pressing conversation on him, simply being present. She watched over him the way you watch over someone you have never stopped loving, from close enough to catch them if they fall. That year marked the spiritual end of Dean Martin, even as his body continued on. The world outside still saw the legend, the man who had once crooned to millions that everybody loves somebody sometime. But those who moved in his orbit saw something entirely different. A man who had stopped pretending. His famous remark, delivered with a half-smile that fooled almost no one who truly knew him, that he was just waiting to die, was not a punchline. It was the most honest thing he said in the last decade of his life. After 1987, Dean Martin withdrew from public life with quiet finality. He made occasional appearances, accepted a few engagements, but his heart was somewhere else entirely. He spent most evenings at the same Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills, de Loretto, seated at his regular table, nursing a glass of wine, watching the room without really seeing it. Jean continued her quiet vigil, dining nearby, never imposing, never absent. Their relationship in those years defied easy description. It was not romance reclaimed or friendship resumed. It was something older and more elemental than either, the loyalty of two people who had built a life together and lost the best of it. By 1993, his body began to reflect what his spirit had long since surrendered. Decades of cigarette smoking had taken their toll in the way doctors had long warned. He was diagnosed with lung cancer, and his physicians urged immediate surgery as the most viable path forward. Dean declined without drama or lengthy deliberation. He told friends simply, "I've had a good life," and left it at that. Those 6 words contained more biography than most men's memoirs. He had been a steelworker's son from Steubenville, Ohio, who became one of the most famous entertainers on the planet. He had sold over 100 million records. He had starred in more than 50 films. He had hosted one of the most successful television programs in history. He had stood at the center of a cultural moment that would never be replicated. And he had outlived his son. 6 words were enough. He spent his remaining months at home in Beverly Hills, surrounded by old photographs and the soft blue light of television reruns, the same medium that had made him a household name, now keeping him quiet company in his final days. The nightclubs that had once shaken with his presence were silent to him now. On Christmas morning, December 25th, 1995, Dean Martin died at his home at the age of 78. The cause was acute respiratory failure brought on by emphysema. The news reached the world gradually, the way news of a great loss often does, with disbelief, then silence, then an outpouring of remembrance that swept across the entertainment world. Frank Sinatra, who had shared a stage, a friendship, and a lifetime of memories with Dean, was devastated. He called Dean his brother, not by the accident of blood, but by the deliberate choice of two men who had recognized something essential in each other across 5 decades. 3 days after Dean's passing, Las Vegas, the city he had helped transform into a global capital of entertainment, paid tribute in the only way that truly measured the size of what had been lost. For 10 full minutes, the lights along the strip went dark. The sands, the flamingo, the stardust, all the great palaces of light and noise where Dean had reigned for so many years, fell into silence and shadow. The city that never sleeps paused for the man who had helped teach it how to shine. Dean Martin was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, not far from other giants of Hollywood's golden era. His crypt carries a single line, drawn from the song that became his signature and his legacy, "Everybody loves somebody sometime." It was an epitaph that said everything and nothing at once, the way Dean himself always had. Jean never remarried. She spent the years after his death living quietly, keeping the memories of their family close, surrounded by photographs of her children and the man she had never truly left behind, even when the marriage ended. She remained a devoted and private presence, shielded from the world in the way Dean himself had always wished he could be. When she passed away from cancer in 2016 at the age of 89, she was buried not far from Dean, as if geography could complete what time had interrupted. Weeks before her death, their son, Richie Martin, who had spent much of his adult life performing and preserving his father's musical legacy, died unexpectedly, making Jean's final days ones of compounded grief that mirrored, in its cruelty, what Dean himself had endured. The Martin family gave the world something rare. They gave it beauty and laughter and music that still plays in restaurants and hotel lobbies and late-night radio programs around the world. But the story behind that gift was not the effortless one the performance suggested. It was built on loss accumulated quietly over decades, on a father's grief that no amount of applause could soften, and on the steady, unannounced loyalty of a woman who loved him well past the point where love required anything in return. Dean Martin spent his final years not in the glow of spotlights, but in the soft, forgiving dark of a man at rest with his choices, haunted perhaps, but no longer performing for anyone. Jean watched him go, as she had watched over him for years from nearby, without intrusion, without demand. And when she went herself, the story finally closed, a love story that had begun in the bright, laughing world of post-war America and ended in the long, quiet shadow that grief leaves behind. Their names are part of the permanent record now, inscribed in the history of a century that will not come again. But what they lived beneath the fame and the music and the legend was something far more human than any of it. It was simply a family, loving imperfectly, losing terribly, and enduring the only way people ever do, one quiet day at a time.